Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for being here with us today. My name's Katie Earle, and I'm the coordinator of our University Express program, and I work for the Erie County Department of Senior Services. And we're here with Marian Deutschman. She'll be our leader today. Welcome, Marian.
Well, thank you, Katie.
Of course. And I'm just looking at the list here, and we have a lot of regulars, which is awesome. So we're hoping for a lot of participation today as Marian goes through her presentation, and we'll be using our chat feature today, which is a change up for us, but you'll still access it just like you would the Q&A. So when she goes through and she's looking for feedback, feel free to type in your questions and comments, or even just when you think of something, put that right in there so we can have good dialogue. And then at the end, if we have time, you'll have the ability to raise your virtual little hand, and we can unmute and we can have some discussion that way. But we hope you, because that's what's going to make this fun. And yeah, we'll thank our sponsors quickly. It's my Department of Senior Services, Blue Cross Blue Shield of Western New York, Excelsior Orthopedics, and Wegmans for everything they do for us. And we're at 858-8526 over here at Senior Services if you ever need anything. All right, let's introduce Marian. Marian is a retired communication department professor at SUNY Buffalo State. For the last 5.5 years at the college, she was director of college and community partnerships. She's on the board of the League of Women Voters of Buffalo Niagara as the local government chair, and the American Association of University Women as the public policy chair. She's also on the board of Bistro Bookers and the education committee of the Network on Aging, and she's been in our program for a while. So welcome, Marian. Thanks for doing this.
Well, thank you, Katie. Our subject today, as you can see, and as you registered for, you must recognize the need for critical thinking, resiliency, problem solving. This may be desperately needed as we move into the post-pandemic status. After all, we had over 600,000 deaths from COVID-19. And that, I heard the president say today, that was more than World War I, World War II, and the Vietnam War combined, and 9/11 combined. That was a traumatic event. We're moving along. Today, we had the lowest number of deaths per day since the early part of the pandemic. So this is something that, well, it occurred 100 years ago. Hopefully it will not occur again soon, but there is always that possibility. So we have some challenges to overcome. As Katie and I were talking, for those of you that participated in a lot of Zoom groups, you're going to have to wear pants now, and you're going to have to put your shoes on because things are changing. And so we have challenges to overcome. If we close our minds to alternatives, how can we reach common ground? And so, as Katie mentioned, I'll be asking questions along the way. So feel free to shout it out to get attention, or type your comment into chat, because I do want to hear from you. So here, we'll start at a light note with the cartoon. Just wait until you're my age and you forget what it's like to be your age. And I do a lot of presentation on generational differences, and certainly different ages reacted to the pandemic in different ways. But adjustments need to be made. So I have some commandments for seniors. You don't need anger management. And I'm going to have to move Katie or get the chat out of there because it's blocking part of my image here. I may even, let's see. Well, anyway, you just need people to stop making you mad. Uh, and it would be wonderful if we could just put ourselves in the dryer for 10 minutes and come out wrinkle-free and 3 sizes smaller. But that might apply whether you've gone through the pandemic or not. And then lately, have you noticed that people your age are so much older? Now, your people skills are just fine. It's your tolerance for idiots that needs work here. So we're talking about resiliency. What is resiliency? It's defined as the ability to overcome challenges. And I've just described our big challenge. Challenges of all kinds. And actually, it could make you better. Because when you bounce back, you might be stronger, wiser, and more personally powerful. So think about how has the pandemic affected you. Now, right now, we're in an adjustment period. There are goals for how many people should become vaccinated by July 4th. And I just attended an event this morning. Most places will say no mask if you're vaccinated. One place I had to show my vaccination. So far, that was the first time that happened. So there are some changes that may stay on, some changes that will be glad we don't have to limit ourselves in that way. But think about that and put it in the chat. How does resiliency relate to the ability to think critically? You need critical thinking to solve problems and overcome challenges. And how we're defining critical thinking. It's a disciplined process that requires you to actively and skillfully conceptualize and evaluate information. Now, you get information from many different sources. It can be observation, could be experience, could be reflection, reasoning, communication with other people. And sometimes we close our minds to alternatives. Why do we do that? How can we reach common ground and solve problems if we close our minds to alternatives? That would mean that all we want is an affirmation of what we believe. Well, that's not going to work for critical thinking. Alexander Hamilton said, "Those who stand for nothing fall for anything." Probably other people have said that as well, but it's primarily attributed to Alexander Hamilton. So we should ask ourselves who, what, where, when, why, and how. Ask not only ourselves, but for the people that we're discussing an issue with. Many of us deceive ourselves. It might be, I just got a book that Katie recommended called Think Again by Adam Grant, and I might use that for another presentation, but the author refers to kind of cognitive laziness. It's easy for us to deceive ourselves by thinking that we're objective, and maybe we aren't. Most people confuse a fervent kind of attachment to something as if there was proof for that. So they kind of confuse themselves emotionally with these opinions that they hold because they hold them with great conviction. And you know, they're so stubborn and so arrogant that and so determined that this must be right. And so they mistake judgmentalism for judgment and assume that their point of view equates with reality. So that means that sometimes we mix up fact and opinion. And many will say that they find this a lot in the media, where it isn't maybe fair as it should be. Sometimes there certainly the op-ed pages are opinion pages, but it could be certainly media sources that you trust may not necessarily be giving you facts. They may be opinion. And so sometimes that gets confused. It may be data, but it may be an interpretation of the data that you're getting. It may be evidence, but it may be conclusions that aren't necessarily based on evidence. Information, we're overwhelmed with information now if we choose to seek it out, but it isn't necessarily all knowledge. And we also have the issue of education and indoctrination. And so we do this ourselves, but it also is true that we do this collectively. So our social life fosters collective illusions while your personal life fosters individual ones. So the concept of having knowledge is often reduced to believing what those around us believe. That's how we choose some of our friends. Otherwise, you might have conflict. So if we all agree, that must be true. Well, not necessarily. Belonging may become stronger than facts. Now, I got Katie in there. How can I move Katie there? I'm going to move her up there so I can read. I knew what it was saying, but I was afraid this might happen on another line. So, did you hear that President Biden is going to force Americans to eat less meat? Did you hear that Virginia is eliminating advanced math in schools to advance racial equality? Did you hear the Democrats are planning to register millions of undocumented migrants to vote? Did you hear that Bill Gates is using the pandemic vaccinations to implant microchips in people's brains in order to track them? Did you hear that border officials are mass purchasing copies of Vice President Harris's book to hand out to refugee children? Did someone you know relay this information to you? All of these are not true, but it may be that you believe that some of them are true. So why are misperceptions about contentious issues in politics and science so persistent and so difficult to correct? Now, part of it may be our sources we trust. It may be that we're in a group, we all believe this. And so if we're to engage in critical thinking, we somehow have to look at what are misperceptions? What is the truth about contentious issues? And that could be a problem finding that. Plus, at the same time, we seek approval from like-minded peers. We kind of gravitate toward the people that affirm us or also agree with us so that if we can carry on more conversation without conflict. In times of conflict, we seek security in groups. If you have growing hostility, it feeds distrust. Making more people more prone to rumor and falsehood. Sometimes you hear the conspiracy theories and you ask people why they believe that, and they say, well, it's a complex issue and I need an answer. And this provides me with an answer which gives me comfort. Whoops. Polarization benefits some people to rally people behind them. Social media, of course, has made a big difference. It's a powerful outlet for people who want to distribute misinformation because they can distribute it to large numbers of people. And lots of times, you can't do research on everything. So if you hear it a number of times from a number of different people, especially those you trust, it must be information and based on facts. So misinformation sometimes may have more appeal and gain more attention, encouraging people to spread it. I often hear, as I'm involved with, as Katie mentioned, the League of Women Voters and the American Association of University Women. And, we all like elections to not spread negative information about candidates. But the reality is that lots of times we don't remember the positive information, but we remember the negative. So they continue to use this negative information. People get positive feedback when they send out misinformation, and especially in social media. They feel rewarded and they do it again. And sometimes the fact checkers, maybe they may be giving you the facts, but they're attacked for making accusations of lying. So it's a dilemma. And of course, we've got people out there who are opportunists and charlatans exploiting this. We're going to have someone from the Attorney General's office as a speaker for the American Association of University Women. And she said the fraud now is 10 times worse than it was pre-pandemic. So those opportunities, opportunists and charlatans are out there doing their thing. And then there's kind of this feeling of anti-intellectualism. It's a trend that it seems as though in America, and I don't know about whether it's true in other countries, but there's an increase in anti-intellectualism. Why is academia being vilified? Why are educated individuals being vilified as elitists? Why is it that being intellectual is considered by many people to be a very negative trait? Dr. Fauci has taken a beating during the pandemic when he keeps referring to evidence, looking at, okay, I said that time, that was what I knew at that time. Sometimes we just want answers. We don't want people to vacillate with information. So why would anyone want to elect leaders, whether it's the president, senators, representatives, governors, who are just average people and who are not intelligent, critical thinkers? Is it a belief that simple people are good? And this is from the professor, a professor from Virginia Tech. So he's in academia, he's an intellectual. Maybe you don't believe what he's saying, but he seems to think that maybe it's a belief that simple people are good and that thinking and learning are bad things. He's not going to keep his job very long if he perpetuates that idea. Enrollment is a problem in colleges and universities. Okay, let's go on to problem solving. Problem problem solving and critical thinking work together. It refers to your ability to use knowledge, facts, and data to solve problems. Because after all, isn't that what we want to do? When out of something like the pandemic, we experience problems, and we want them to be solved to the best of our ability. Now, this doesn't mean that you should have an immediate answer. It means that you have to be able to think on your feet, to assess the problem, to identify the problem. If you haven't stopped to do that, you're not going to be able to find solutions. So here are some things that we would ordinarily think you need to do. You need to solve problems. You have to find an agreement. You have to collaborate. You have to identify the problem and define it. And look for different solutions and ask a lot of questions and develop some criteria and see what the causes are. And that doesn't happen in an instant. And it probably means that you have to start using the intellect, using the critical thinking and skills, and looking at evidence, looking at facts. Usually, this means you're not doing it by yourself. The pandemic has made us more aware of our interdependence, how much we rely or need to rely on other people to help us out. It may not be an ideal way of doing it. They may have a different way of doing something. When my neighbor, who's a very nice woman, is a nurse, and early in the pandemic, she said, I'm going grocery shopping, and I'll get some things for you that you might need. I made a list. I gave her descriptions of what I wanted, and she made changes. I mean, she said, I didn't get you hamburger because turkey is healthier. And, well, that was very nice of her, but that wasn't exactly what I asked for. And so, people that you will collaborate with or want to collaborate with, of course, may have different approaches. We can improve our relationships. These are quotes from people. We can improve our relationships with others by leaps and bounds if we become encouragers instead of critics. That's a tough road to go. But some people are born to be encouragers, and some have to work hard at avoiding being a critic. Michelle Obama had a quote, keep away from those who try to belittle your ambitions. Choose people who lift you up. So, some people after a while, that you don't want to be with them when you're feeling down and depressed. So I'm asking you some questions that you might want to put some responses in chat. Are relationships among people better or worse than a few years ago? What are the main differences in the way people formed relationships, say 20 years ago and today? Now, this relates maybe to generational differences because we respond to significant emotional events during our lifetime that have an impact on us and our way of thinking. I'm sure that the children who lived through this pandemic, it affected them in ways that probably in some form will continue throughout the rest of their lives. So if you have some comments to make on these two questions, are relationships among people better or worse than a few years ago? And what are the main differences in the way people formed relationships 20 years ago and today? Is there as respect, acceptance, are we patient, trusting? Um, do we laugh enough? Do we um, tell stories that make us feel good to build the relationships? Do we listen? There's a difference between listening and hearing, and there's a difference between looking and seeing. And so think about that as we talk about relationships. There was a survey of readers of a publication called Very Well Mind. Readers show that the pandemic has made relationships better for 27% of the people and worse for an equal proportion of people, which is kind of interesting. What happened to the rest of them? They're neutral, I guess. The most frequently cited concern among those who were surveyed was boredom. Was that a problem for you? 40% of the people have experienced boredom while living with a significant other during the pandemic. There was an article in the New Yorker that we discussed this morning where lonely people, usually more likely elderly people, there are robotic animals that they can get now that they're programmed not only to monitor your health or changes that you might be experiencing as you're living alone, but that animal can, you don't have to clean up after them. That's one nice thing. But other than that, some of the behaviors that are exhibited with this robotic animal are similar to having an animal. And some people, it's made a tremendous difference in their lives. And it was first distributed, I believe, in Cattaraugus County by the Department of Senior Services, I think, in that county. So do you know anything about that, Katie? Robotic animals? Have you heard of them?
If you're asking me, sorry, my audio cut out. Yes, I've heard of them and I've actually petted them. They're interesting.
Yeah, they're about $100 each, I guess, or so. I mean, it's not inexpensive, but there people were bored, no question. People are during the pandemic, whatever their age may be, and that may be why there's more, more fraud and that kind of thing. But if you're living alone, it might be a great opportunity to monitor people with something like that, as well as providing them with a companion, so to speak. But then there are ethical concerns. Wouldn't it be better to have a real person there? While some relationships have understandably not withstood the weight of pandemic stress, another survey shows that most people have become stronger and found ways to adjust their lives at home to the new normal. And that shows resiliency in the face of crisis. And that may be one of the brightest spots in this pandemic. I didn't even hear about Zoom before the pandemic. I have participated in more Zoom groups. And to see one of the adjustments you're going to have to make, as we said, where now you're going to have to wear pants and for those Zoomers and put shoes on, which you might not have been doing for a while. Sometimes I'm surprised when I saw I saw one woman in person and thought, oh my goodness, I thought she was a real big woman and she really slight build. So, it's like meeting a new person. Okay, not all relationships are fulfilling. As was mentioned earlier, find people that lift you up. How can you add depth strength and make your relationships and connections more meaningful? Well, part of it is selection. Now it depends. If you're working, sometimes you're not able to select your colleagues in the workplace. But you have the name of a consultant here who says that you have to meet more people. Surround yourself with more people. Don't rely on the same people all the time. Talk about things that matter to you. And don't be afraid to let your vulnerability and humanity show. People need, one of the big things that we've lost during the pandemic is touch. When was the last time you got a hug? That was something we had to give up. Somehow that, hitting your elbow against somebody else's elbow is not quite as satisfying as a hug. You need to have integrity. You define integrity in your own way, but it's a value system. Be there for others, and with strong relationships, you may feel more fulfilled and have fulfilled a need that someone else had. And that will help you to feel more connected to the world. Part of this requires negotiation. How many of you would consider yourselves good negotiators? We're not doing a poll, but you may come up with a question in chat that relates to that. Are there any questions in chat? I took chat out so that I could read my questions and comments. If there are questions,
Okay.
I'll leave that to the end, or if there is a question related to at this time, I could pull that down and look
I think we can wait until the end,
Okay.
Marian.
Okay.
Yeah.
So how many of you feel that you aren't very strong or confident negotiators? Maybe just from past experience, you kind of feel that way. Recommendations from another source. Think in terms of what's the best possible outcome. What's the most that you could realistically go after in this negotiation? What's your bottom line? And what the bottom line may refer to is your least acceptable offer. And what's your plan B? A couple other members of the Harvard negotiation project and the authors of Getting to Say Yes, they call this the BATNA. BATNA, your best alternative for negotiated agreement. So it's looking at what are you going to do if you don't reach an agreement. So you're using critical thinking skills, you're using problem solving skills, you're looking for a common ground, and you're open to looking at alternatives. Find the strategy that will move you closer to your best possible outcome. Think about yourself, though. Sometimes we make mistakes when we negotiate. Well, I think it was Oprah Winfrey said, you don't make mistakes, they're learning experiences. You just don't make that same mistake again. Lots of times we do this, and I know myself, I'm not going to talk about that, but you have a habitual way of doing something, especially in a negotiation, that may not be very productive, and yet you continue to do it because of your emotional involvement or whatever that may be guiding your behavior. ask questions about what's in it for them. Ask yourself those questions. It also asking them, it builds your negotiating counterpart, your opponent's motivation. Just by taking on the role of the reluctant party, according to this expert, you can actually force your opponent to take on the role of the eager party. So these tactics, according to the expert called Finkel, this will give you the biggest return on your investment. We're not just talking money here. We're talking about the investments of your time and your attention. And what you're looking for in building these relationships, building these connections, and hopefully solving problems is you have invested time and attention, and hopefully you will get a reasonable return. Now, the truth is that everything that, according to this man, everything that happened in my life that I thought was a crushing event at the time has turned out for the better. Anybody recognize him? Anybody recognize who this is? He was born in 1930, so he's been around for a long time. He's an American businessman. He's also made enough money that he's a philanthropist. Any guesses? How about you, Katie?
Well, I don't have one, but someone put in the chat Murdoch.
No.
Or Warren Buffett.
No. He had a connection to Buffalo at one time, to the Buffalo News. How about one of the richest men in the country? You know, with Bezos and Tesla and Gates. That's Warren Buffett. And at one time he owned the Buffalo News. Well, easy for him to say that everything that happened in his life that he thought was a crushing event at the time has turned out for the better. Yeah, easy for him to say. But if you think you're too small to be effective, have you ever been in the dark with a mosquito? They can be very effective. You know, after all, they're after your blood, I believe. So if you've ever gone to the fireworks on the 4th of July in a park, you may have memories of that for a few days. So thinking that you're too small to be effective, give it a try with critical thinking and being open to new ideas and alternatives, making the right connections, learning to negotiate effectively, problem solving and problem solutions are possibilities. Now, I'd like to see if people have given me some thoughts. Oh, she just said yes and no. And I see Judy Goldstein.
If we go back up, Marian, it looks like this was just, to me, this was from back in the beginning. And right. I think people tend to believe things if they see them enough.
Oh, okay, you're saying, that's a comment. People tend to believe things if they see them enough. Well, I think we've become kind of optimized by that most recently because of social media, that people repeat and repeat and distribute to large numbers of people. And it had been our assumption in the past, if a lot of people believe this, it must be true. But that isn't necessarily so. And then, as I mentioned earlier, this need to make connections and build relationships makes us gravitate toward people who have also seen this, what could be a misrepresentation. As I said with those first statements, if you believe some of those statements that were absolutely not true, how did you get to believe them? You got to believe them because you saw them so many times. And people started repeating them. And pretty soon they became real to you, even though they were misrepresentations. So I think we are struggling with that problem. Any other comments? This would be
around that same time. This came right to me, and it says about seeking information. It says maybe seeking information that validates our feelings of security.
Yes, and of course, at a time when we're feeling down and depressed and insecure, and especially, well, even now, you're not sure. Part of it is that sometimes facts take a long time to gather. You're waiting for research data. It may be that the facts are not available, or that they've given you as much as they know at that time. We had the problem with the masks at the beginning. And I think, again, I mentioned Dr. Fauci. He was trying to explain, initially, they didn't think that masks were necessary. Plus, there was this feeling of, whether it was true or not, that there was a shortage of the masks, and the people who were the essential workers needed them more than we did. And then suddenly they're telling us to be wearing masks. Then they said, I mean, do you remember the toilet paper? Do you remember the sanitizer? The shelves were bare in the markets. I mean, and then they later, I mean, we still use toilet paper, but you know, the need to sanitize every surface was not necessarily a requirement. But you know, were you cleaning doorknobs and all of that? I was glad when I finally didn't have to clean every item that I got at the supermarket the way Dr. Sanjay Gupta would tell you to do it, or whatever doctor was on TV. So I was doing it until I didn't get conclusive information, but when I talked to my friends, they go, oh, I stopped doing that a long time ago. You know, and so you have a tendency to believe some of these people. Am I crazy for continuing to clean all my groceries? Part of it is that some information just is not conclusive enough at a time when we need answers. Other comments or questions?
This is regarding your question about whether or not relationships have gotten better or worse. This person says worse because political correctness stifles.
Because political
correctness stifles. I'm assuming stifles conversation, or if I'm guessing there.
You're absolutely right. People were not looking forward to the first Thanksgiving when family members come together. And I know when I did a presentation people said no, they weren't looking forward to that. And so there is political correctness is viewed in different ways. And it needn't be that political correctness is on one end and polarization information is on the other. But it does, you're right, it does stifle conversation. And that's true. You would think that family members and your friends would be certainly people that would be open to helping you to get over this feeling of isolation or building resiliency. And that didn't, sometimes that didn't happen with friends and family. There's an anonymity, more anonymity due to, is that what you're looking at, Katie?
Yep, that's still in regard to the relationships, better or worse.
Encourage. Oh, I would agree with that the anonymity in social media encourages dishonesty. And there is no question. When I asked how different were relationships 20 years ago, clearly relationships have changed, whether there was a pandemic or not. That I'd like to know what specifically the person was thinking of when we felt that the social media encouraged dishonesty, some specific things, because in general, yes, I fully agree. But there may be some specific things the person might want to say if you want to unmute yourself. Are there others?
I'm also seeing relationships are better now because there's more ways to connect.
Okay. More ways to connect because of social media or because of something else?
That's a good question. I guess we'll give it a second and see if they type it in. And if you're not familiar with how to access the chat, it's normally in the spot where you'd find the Q&A. So if you're on a computer, it's located at the lower right-hand side of your screen. Just click on that to expand it. And if you're on a tablet or smartphone, touch it. That brings up your control panel. You should see a circle with 3 dots. Click on that, and then you'll see your chat. So we'll give it a second. Okay, it looks like more ways to connect and talk, email, texting, social media.
Yeah, we have a lot more options. When I was in graduate school in it would have been in the 80s, we did research on the acceptance of computers. A lot of people felt that they didn't need them. What were they going to do? Why did they need them? And this was in Western New York area. And it's a source of amazement how much the technology and how quickly the technology has been accepted and how we got along without it. you know, I don't know. Our kids didn't have cell phones, and yet I don't think I worried that, you know, they're going to be abducted or something, you know, if they didn't have a cell phone to call me. Um, you know, these are people who can't live without it because they were born into it. And those of us that preceded it, the feeling at the college every time you said, well, what are we losing while we're accepting the computers and into so much of our lives? And people say, oh, you're just resisting. You're just resisting. But I think the technology has certainly uh, moved ahead of the regulation and controls that should have been there. We certainly have been aware of that now with Facebook, uh, with Google, with uh, resources that are part of our lives that we weren't thinking of the negatives it might bring because there were so many positives. This has made major changes in our lives. And when I did the presentation on post-pandemic, it was clear that the technology has spread across generations. More of the traditional population, the older population, has adopted technology out of necessity and bought cell phones and other technology because it became necessary for them. Although one friend of mine uh, bought a cell phone, but she doesn't use it. And I say, you've got to use it. And she said, well, you used a computer at work. And she said she had uh, stopped working at a certain point. So, you know, word processor was what she used. And well, there are classes at libraries. There are classes you can attend. If you've got a consumer cellular phone, just list your questions, call them up. So I'm encouraging you to use this at the very same time that we're talking about how it has affected our lives negatively in some ways. And so um, it's a risk benefit weighing. Um, but if you're still working, you probably have 4 or 5 generations of people that you're working with. Each of those generations, as I said in the last presentation that I did, have certain ideas about the right way to do things. Well, we can learn from each other. My daughter just started a new job about 6 months ago, and she was the only one in the office for a long time because everybody else was working remotely. Now, that didn't happen um, regularly before, but that certainly is a major uh, change. Uh, any other questions or comments?
This question just came in is there a way to convince someone of something if their beliefs are based on misinformation?
Well, without, I'm sure you mean without conflict. Is there a way to do that? Well, the next presentation in the book that was suggested for me to read, and I went to Barnes and Noble and got it. It's called Think Again. There are different ways to approach people. And one of the things they said in the book, part of the problem that we have is cognitive laziness, and I referred to that earlier. Some psychologists point out that we're mental misers. We often prefer the ease of hanging on to old views over the difficulty of grappling with new ones. Yet there are also deeper forces behind our resistance to rethinking. Questioning ourselves makes the world more unpredictable. It requires us to admit that facts may have changed, that what was once right may now be wrong. That's a tough thing to do. And when I referred to the perhaps 5 generations in the workplace, thinking that we can learn from each other, whether it's an older person, just because a person has been there a long time, and it doesn't mean that they have all the answers, nor does it mean that because the person is new and young that they have all the answers. And so it requires us to admit that facts may have changed, that, as I said, that what once was right may be wrong. So reconsidering something we believe deeply can threaten us, can be a threat to our identities. And it makes us feel as though we're losing part of ourselves. So, it's kind of that negotiating the skill of meeting someone halfway. I did some negotiating and consulting. It's not easy to use that, but the first thing you need to do is find some common ground. And we're in many ways more alike than we are different. So maybe searching for what we have in common would be a place to start. There must be something that you agree on. Right now, we have that problem in our government, polarized views and unwillingness to negotiate. It's clearly you've identified a major problem. So the best I can suggest is coming up to arriving at some common ground and working from there. And it's not going to happen quickly. That might at least, we're all for, when I used to work at Children's Hospital, everyone was in favor of helping children. When I was on the board of Meals on Wheels, everybody was supportive of Meals on Wheels. There are certain issues that you can find some commonality, and it may be far from what you really want to talk about, but start there. Anything else?
The only other thing I'm seeing is somebody thinks that that's good advice.
Oh, good. Come on, glad. It would be interesting if we had sometimes the sharing that people do when I've done these presentations in person. Sometimes the stories that people tell in the audience are even more effective than what I could share with you because they're personal. They have invested themselves in this, and they've been either success stories that you can share with others that may be instructive, or they may be I wouldn't say failure because we don't want to say failure. They've been learning experiences, and sometimes they can share that learning experience, or there may be someone in the audience who had a similar experience and they can share how they handled it successfully.
Yeah, definitely a lot of value for that, Marian. I agree. I'm not seeing anything else come through. We can give it a second here, but there's certainly a lot to think about. So thank you, Marian.
Okay, well, hopefully I've given you food for thought. We made this presentation a bit shorter than the last one because, whoops, I'm going to go back to this. Gives you a little review. Because the last time we ran over and overtime and quite a bit overtime, but we had a lot of sharing the last time of information. So anybody else that has any other comments? I'm not here to give you a lot of answers. I wish that I were, but on the other hand, I think what happens is that there are such differences that for me to say, well, this always works, that's not going to, sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. And the circumstances could be completely different. But on the political correctness issue, on people that have sometimes to avoid conflict, I don't recommend this, but sometimes the best thing to do is to steer clear of the subject. That, part of the presentation was on building relationships and connectedness. And it may be if you increase your the number of people that you come in contact with, those people who are downers, the people who make you feel as if you're making mistakes or if your thoughts are incorrect. I mean, they may be challenging you and it may be a good time to have a discussion, but if they're unwilling, then find people that are more willing and open to new ideas and sharing ideas. I think I would have a problem with some of the conspiracy theorists. I think you could find a common ground, but when people believe, what was it? Hillary Clinton was holding children hostage in a pizza parlor somewhere. That was an old theory. And I don't know what some of the new ones are, but it's kind of interesting that they make predictions, and then when the predictions don't materialize, then it's just forgotten. And which may be just as well, but we want ideally to make things better, and this may be a good starting point to do that. I think that's, unless someone else has any questions, comments, good ideas, we're looking for good advice. Judy Goldstein said good advice, but I'm looking for good advice from you.
I'm seeing thank you for this presentation, and I'm seeing thanks for giving us food for thought.
Well, that's good. That's a start. And we have some of the same issues that we're dealing with, besides changing your clothes. I didn't buy many clothes this year. uh, uh, I didn't drive as much this year. I didn't go out to dinner as much. Think of the money we saved this year, right? Um, but I also think of the people that didn't have jobs. We still have an unemployment rate in this area. I think I heard 6% or so. So things are not. If you lost anyone in your family or suffered illness, how many people don't have their vaccinations yet? That I did hear today that, some people were saying, I wish I waited because I could have gotten a scholarship or I could have gotten into the lottery depending on where you were. And of course, they're trying all kinds of methods to get people to vaccinate, and fear does not appear to be a good motivator uh, for getting the vaccine. Um, and of course, we have children under 12 that are about 20% of the population that are not vaccinated yet. Um, so I'm not sure if any of you have ideas on how to improve the vaccination rate. No thoughts? No people with good advice? And
I'm not seeing anything.
okay, well, there are some guidelines as you look online on resiliency. Um, Focus on results. Results are what we're all really after. Um, and so, as I said earlier, make lessons of your failures. Um, Calling a failure a mistake or anything more than lesson, um, it, it really is a learning experience. And I think of it that way. And the kind of, some people call it, accept them, the mistakes or the failures, as tuition for future success. Um, and sometimes our mistakes put us in a bind, and we may have some uncomfortable consequences. And I don't know if you stew over them, but my husband would say, forget it, it's over. Well, not all of us um, are built that way. And sometimes we stew over it, but maybe if you treat it as a learning experience, it won't be so devastating. And then continue on. Maybe continue on smarter, um, and reinforce each other, encourage other people. Before you go to bed tonight, what person did I make feel better? Might be one approach as a starting point, rather than saying what I said about seniors at the beginning, you know, people should stop making you mad, or um, uh, people are idiots that need work and I don't kind of attitude. So, okay, well, I thank you for your attention. And somebody said I like that, but I don't know who that was. Debbie. Well, thank you. If I was helpful to someone, it's good to know that. We don't need more conflict.
No, we don't, Marian, but thank you very much for guiding us through this, and thank you to everyone who's on. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you, Katie.